So I think just being present to people, as you know, whoever your spiritual connection is, I think that's sort of a common thread. So being present to people, and then started to branch out and ask the parents that were there about their kids and what they want to do. When we created these programs, we were on the ground with the people. We even had the kids in the room telling us, there's a place called Ozanam Inn, they call it the Oz. It was a homeless shelter that fed people. And they said, we don't want an Oz Junior when we created our dining experience. They wanted a dining experience. And so, man, we had the finest plates and silverware. And, you know, man, it was a real uplift. In the middle of all this degradation, here we were on a Saturday night having an awesome dining experience, and some of the top chefs giving us the food. So it was a real, and then we'd have the volunteers come in and sit with the kids and do artwork, and they were eating with a knife and fork for the first time sometimes. So, you know, to not judge and to realize that simple things that a lot of us have had the blessing, we can't take it for granted.
Sir, next question. Thank you for that.
David Winsky, the Institute of Music for Children, not to take us away from the uplift, but to get back to the business a little bit. You talked briefly about the business need that the hospitality industry had in New Orleans. So I was curious in terms of when you're reaching out to that, when you're trying to create the business aspect of it, and you want to say, okay, we want to produce something that's of value. Yes, people are going to get involved because they're moved by our social mission, but on the business front, what was it in your case that you were providing to them, and how would you say people should go about thinking about the business value that they provide?
Yeah, the kids that came in would typically, you know, they would go to a restaurant, they'd get a job, because the restaurants were so hard up for entry-level people, but they'd have to go through 20 people to get one. So once a kid came from us, he had some life skills, rudimentary skills, understanding of what the process would be. You know, they would, then we might have turned it into, I would say in the beginning, probably our kids, maybe 6 or 8 out of 10 would keep a job longer than a month, or 2 months, or 6 months.
So you save the money on training, you save the money on turnover, you save the money on the issue you have before you have to let them go or before they quit.
Exactly. And then as you inform your program, you can say, okay, well, I need a staff person that would address that issue, because turnover is very expensive for businesses.
But you didn't know that going in.
Well, we had other than our startup with the Hilton, they gave us the feedback. The human resources department would be the best place, in my estimation, to go. You could go to human resources associations or whoever and say, what are your issues? And they have all the workplace segments. You know, they have all that data sitting there. You just have to figure out what you want to knock in the head. You know, my opinion.
Excellent question. Yes.
Thank you. Good morning. Your work is inspiring, and thank you for your story this morning. My name is Karen Hatcher. I'm the director of Celebrate New Jersey. My question to you has to do with sustainability in the organization, and at which point you felt, or what was the process like for you when you made the transition from being a charity to being a social enterprise? You know, what was that like for you? Because as a nonprofit looking at sustainability and how to build that into my organization, I'm challenged to envision how we would morph into a social enterprise from a charity. And so I'm kind of curious as to what you feel like the process was, or what that was like for you.
In the beginning, we had an idea that we wanted to get people to be part of the solution and not just be a hand out, but a hand up. So going back and revisiting, you know, the foundation of your beliefs, I think could be helpful for us. And even as we make these transitions from when I was running everything up until like 3 years ago, and now having other people in leadership who have different philosophies, you have to have certain things in play. You know, you have to stay strong on, we're going to build this fishing pole factory. We're going to teach them how to fish. We're not going to give them the fish. So whatever it is, you have to boil down to and figure out, or whatever business model, whatever, it could be any kind of businesses, clerical, human resources, back off, all kinds of opportunities. I don't even begin to think I know all of them, but to realize that in an environment that's competitive and challenging, I say any of these kids could be a brain surgeon. Oh, I could have been if I could have killed 1,000 people, and that was my, first, because it's a more hands-on. So if you're thinking in terms of who you're serving and what their gifts are, celebrate their giftedness, try to help them transition, but create a more real world. What is it really like in the business world? What is it really like in the places that they're going to wind up being? So,
and you may have to be willing to let go of a model of operation or a mode of operation that you and the other people in your institution are very, very invested in. And I've seen this happen. People like it the way it is. They may want it to do better. We want everything around us to change as long as we don't have to change. So you have to go back to your core and say, what would we look like as a business with a social mission, which is different from a straight charity. Some people may not have jobs anymore, and they're not going to like that. Or the job they're asked to do will be very different. So it's true reinvention. I'm going to say, because I don't see what else online, we're going to take these 3 questions and then wrap up. So don't get online if you think of something.
Can I say one thing to add to that? The passion of the people in the organization, and sometimes organizations get very large, and so for me the experience was when I had people who were there from the passion in and really bought into it, they've been so much more productive in being able to really do it. It wasn't a job, it was it was a commitment. That's been very helpful too. And I think that's part of what a culture of an organization would say.
Right.
Yeah. So those things are important.
Sure.
Good morning. Chike Uzoka, founder of Valentine Global. We specialize in doing entrepreneurship and financial literacy workshops and curricula for youth and young adults. And so kind of building off her question, you said when you started out you did not know that you were a social entrepreneur. What was that epiphany? What was that conversation, that day, that something that made you realize that you were now a social entrepreneur?
The lieutenant governor at the time, Mitch Landrieu, was nailing mad. He came and went to some conference, and I think he met Jeffrey and several others, and he said, "This is what you are." And I said, "Can you go around the state, let's tell other communities doing this thing, I'm like, sure, So that's really, but in that early, reality, I'm a slow learner, I'm 54, my kids are 8 and 6, so I'm a slow learner. From that perspective, learning in hindsight is real learning, after you've been through that experience. But it just sort of, it took on its own life. When we were actually running a restaurant, I worked in 5-star restaurants, so I didn't know you weren't supposed to have everything polished and, you just have to, go for the top and whatever you're going to do. And then you realize that, man, everybody that you start associating with, they're going to appreciate it. And it's difficult to keep it up at a high level, But, and then the transitions come, the crossroads. But again, I really feel a passion. That's, again, why we, want to come and help share. And encouragement's a big thing. You need people who are where you are to rub elbows with, and people who are way ahead of you to help guide you, and people that you can kind of help along from the beginning. It's just the theory that I had. I've been blessed by that.
Great question, thank you. Next question.
Lashana Hassett from the Center for Counseling and Holistic Services. I have a 501c3 nonprofit social enterprise, where my client base is actual other nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations, businesses, and corporations. What advice can you give me in building effective collaborations with other nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations, social enterprises, and so forth?
what type of services do you do?
I coined it a la carte services. Other people know it as supplemental services, in which I'm a licensed therapist and I have other licensed credentialed folks with me, and we go in and provide on-site services to nonprofit organizations to try to decrease clients' loss to care. So usually when you cannot provide a service for a client, you will refer them out to another organization, and you can potentially lose your client that way. But we come in with a seamless service to provide that counseling services on-site for you, so you won't have to refer out.
And it goes down to that real trust issue, you know, finding people that you can build those real close relationships with. You know, that's what's a difficult transition, I have to agree. And so, to say, you know, I mean, we could have a conversation later, but to say some of my experiences being that, you know, find just a few that you can start, because you will become the model for others to do the real collaboration. Because I think that's the hardest work to do. And not, it's going to take a lot. It's like any good relationship, you know. You got to work. You got to invest.
So there's no real easy answers other than trying to serve and commit to building a relationship.
Yes, I really believe that.
Okay.
Final question. Maybe good. Oh, pressure.
I know you very briefly touched on the Reconciliation Institute. I'm just curious, is that institute a social enterprise where you're charging for consulting fees, or is that an institute that's funded by someone who's allowing you to go in?
I'll tell you, it started as another vision for myself and Pam and Don in conversation a couple of years ago because we've had hundreds of requests from around the country to share our experience or share the type of thing we've done. So it was a burden on us. We have to help people. You know, we have to share this experience. So through a whole bunch of challenges of even the board that exists now not being able to vision that far out, we've gone through all of that stuff and we're still going through it. But an individual came forward and funded us through a startup phase, which, you know, a lot easier because we already knew, you know, put things in place. And Pam's agreed to shepherd it through its beginning, so we're in its infancy. But we're building all of our pieces and putting them together. But we would like to find the type of funding that will allow us to give it back where it's not a burden on the startups, but we're going to have to do some type of assessment of the different organizations, see what kind of time commitments. But it's more about building the relationships. One of the big conversations we're going to have with Jeffrey and others is how can we do this together? Because, you know, nobody's an expert at it all, and it's more about plugging people in, like all these questions. Who do you plug into to get your startup help? So we can share our experience, but we have to be honest about that's not our expertise. Pam's passion is in urban gardening and that type of thing. Don has a big business in Louisville, so we have some semblance of our experience, but it's more who do we help you connect to the right people to help
So
you.
it's less about consulting and more about helping to establish the relationships necessary to get people to be able to achieve their mission.
I think so. And what the challenges are as you go through the transitions and growth. Is that
Yep, that
clear enough?
Yeah.
I mean, but so the startup stuff, it's very humble again. It's like starting all over, a very humble situation. But
What's your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Jean Cordell from Project Self-Sufficiency.
Wasn't that a great last question from Gene?
Yeah.
Give Gene a round. And while we're in the spirit of giving love